right, so we're going to continue through the ministry of Jesus. We should wrap up. We're on track to finish it before Thanksgiving, and then we'll have the weekend of Thanksgiving off. I actually have a handout for everybody. Don't want to forget.
Wait,
This is third reading plan. So this gives you your homework for the
I
next.
thought we already had that.
Nope.
Oh wait, no.
That was the second. We just finished that up today. Can you
We
hand
have-
that to the guys behind you?
We have the weekend of Thanksgiving off, right?
Please hand that back to Jeremy.
George.
I like a weird.
Oh guys, I will not be
Ball
this
wrap.
flower.
Alright. So the week with Thanksgiving, we don't have a memory verse or a meditation that week because we won't be meeting here to give the memory verse or talk about the meditation. So that'll be 2 weeks worth of reading, but only one meditation and one memory verse that first Sunday in December that we're back here. So that'll be clear before you leave for Thanksgiving. Alright.
Do we have a second year ministry map thing that we're gonna get?
Yes, we'll get that out shortly here, because we're going through Jesus' second year of ministry. Jesus' second year of ministry takes place largely in Galilee. So you can write whatever notes you want onto this map. Yep. Or you can just follow along for frame of reference. However,
My apologies.
I do lose back. Yay.
Well, now you can have two.
This one feels thick.
alrighty, yeah, so Sunday after Thanksgiving is November 30th, and Thanksgiving weekend is exhausting and full of lots of family things, and so Foundations for Faith won't get in the way of any family activities going on. We'll just have 2 weeks of reading. We'll cover on the 7th of December, Pearl Harbor Day is when we'll be back. Ooh, then Pearl Harbor will be on a Sunday this year too.
Oh.
Yes. Alright, we're continuing in 4 gospel accounts. We have not yet made it to the book of Acts or any of the epistles. We will get there sometime after the new year. And so we're going to look tonight at Jesus' second year of ministry. Last week we wrapped up his first year of ministry. And if you remember, Passover holiday is the holiday that we use to keep track of all of Jesus' years of ministry and sort out the timeline of events. And this one starts in John chapter 5, second Passover of Jesus' ministry. He's in Jerusalem on the Sabbath, and he heals a paralytic at the pool in Bethesda. And this sparks the first conflict of a long-standing series of conflicts over what is lawful and what is unlawful to do on the Sabbath. The Pharisees had very strict rules about what could and could not be done. You could walk about 1,500 steps, and that was as much as you could walk on the Sabbath day. If you walked further than that, it was considered work. And you could not work on the Sabbath, because you were supposed to rest on the Sabbath. And they had ironed out all the details, and then Jesus up and heals somebody, and nobody had even thought about could you or could you not heal somebody.
Wait, so 1,500 feet, is that
Steps.
like steps? So is that 1,500 steps to get somewhere, or is that throughout the entire day?
I am not up to speed on that nuance.
Wait,
I'm saying it was a day, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, a Sabbath day's walk was the idea. Will?
How did they track their steps without Apple Watch?
Yeah, I have no idea. It was kind of like I can go from here to there and that works, and I can still get back and be in bed at nighttime. Or otherwise you get stuck somewhere until sundown before you can finish your walk. Maddie?
is that Bethesda the same one on here?
Nope. This Bethesda is the name of a pool of water in the city of Jerusalem.
Okay.
So it is not on your map. And Jerusalem's not on your map because this is the one time that Jesus is not in Galilee at the very beginning of his second year. So he returns from Jerusalem back up to Galilee. And in Mark chapter 2, we find in Galilee, he's having a similar discussion about the Sabbath. His disciples picked some grain out of a field, which was perfectly legal. It was not considered stealing, that was just gleaning. Anybody who was hungry could grab a little bit of grain out of a field. And the Pharisees challenged Jesus because they are picking up grain on the Sabbath. Is that harvesting? Is that considered work? And Jesus responds, telling about how David ate the bread of the presence, which only the high priests were supposed to eat, and how the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And this challenged the Pharisees in a great way. As if that's not enough, then he heals somebody else on the Sabbath in a synagogue. There was a man with a withered hand there, and at this point Jesus just flat out asks everybody who's present, is it lawful to answer on the Sabbath? And nobody knows the answer to that, and so he just decides it must be. And so he goes ahead and heals the guy in their presence, and this provokes the Pharisees, and they start conspiring with the Herodians, which is the politically astute group that was aligned with Herod, ruling over the Jews. And at this point, Jesus starts attracting very huge crowds, it says in Mark. That behind you. Then the next thing that Jesus does in his second year is sort out and appoint the apostles. So he prays on a mountainside all night, which is a good example of us to seek the Lord when we're making heavy, weighty decisions. At this point, Jesus has quite a few people who have been following him and are his disciples. He sets aside 12 of them as apostles, which means sent ones. And they were the ones he's going to send out as witnesses to his resurrection, although they don't know that detail at this point in time. I don't know that it does. I haven't seen all the episodes in all the seasons, so I'm not sure what it does and doesn't have. Interesting thing about the 12 apostles is that the 4 Gospels and Acts don't actually fully agree upon which ones are which and who they are. So I lined them up with the common justifications as to which ones are discrepant. So Luke was, of course, the author of both Luke and Acts, and so his lists actually align. All of them agree on Simon Peter and Andrew and James and John, the sons of Zebedee, and Philip is agreed upon everywhere. John is the oddball. He has Nathaniel, which is probably Bartholomew in the other Gospels. That's not precisely known, but Nathaniel is always attached to Philip, just like Bartholomew is attached to Philip. In the other Gospels, they come in pairs. So that's presumably, but it's possible that they're different people. Thomas, a nickname that's given in John, known as Didymus. Matthew has a nickname, Levi. What is his other name? And it is actually not mentioned in the book of John, nor are the other ones. The other discrepancy is a guy by the name of Thaddeus in Matthew and Mark, who in Luke and Acts is probably Judas, the son of James. Simon the Zealot and Judas Iscariot come across in all of them, and of course we find out in a few weeks Judas Iscariot kills himself, and he gets replaced in the book of Acts by Matthias, who is the last of the apostles, and he had been one of Jesus' disciples from the very beginning, since the days John the Baptist was baptizing the Jordan River. And so you get this little window that there were the 12 apostles, and those are of course the famous ones that get in the Chosen, but one thing the Chosen is missing is Matthias was in every single one of those scenes, and he's not in the Chosen. So don't take everything as in the chosen as gospel truth. Even though it's portraying the gospels, there are things that are taken for granted and literary license. I think it's a great show, but Matthias is missing, and he should be there all the time. Anyhow, bonus feature at the bottom there, the 4 brothers of Jesus are named in the Gospels. They were his half-brothers because Joseph and Mary had children after Jesus was born, but Jesus was only the son of Mary. Joseph was a stepfather because Mary conceived of the Holy Spirit. But Jesus has brothers, James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon. James is the author of the book of James, and Judas is the author of the book of Jude. Will.
I think we talked about this before, about how the Catholic Church, like,
They oftentimes think that those are sons that, or I've heard that they're sons of Joseph before he married Mary. That he had a previous wife who died and was bringing children into the marriage. So that is one reconciliation, because they try to keep Mary as the perpetual ever virgin.
Right.
Whereas here it would seem as if, she very much wasn't, because she had other children. So, and Jesus also had sisters, which is plural. We don't know how many, and none of them are named that I am aware of. But, so that is that handout explained for you. So remember, in the first year of Jesus' ministry, he had the Sermon on the Mount. In the second year of his ministry, he has the Sermon on the Plain. And this is covered in Luke chapter 6. A lot of parallels in content between the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain. Yes, Micaiah?
So when it says like he went around to the different synagogues preaching or whatever, do you think he was giving a similar message to the Sermon on the Mount or Sermon on the Plain? And he was just like recycling the same like ideas?
I would imagine so. I learned this and picked up on this actually on my own missions trips. I was traveling around with Neil Tilke in various countries. He was my mentor as a pastor and trained me how to be a pastor. And on missions trips, he would recycle messages over and over and over again because he always had a different crowd. And so they were all hearing something for the first time, and I was hearing it for the 6th, 7th, 8th, or 9th time. And that was where I picked up on, like, okay, so when Jesus is preaching something in one gospel and it comes off this way, and something different in a different gospel and it's a little different but very similar, it's probably just the same basic message delivered at 2 different occasions, and so it's got its own nuances and differences to it, because that is the way things happen. Few of Jesus' parables are that way. The Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain are very much that way. But content shifts slightly, basically the same. Interesting thing about Jesus' ministry is he was on earth ministering for about 1,100 days, but only 50 of them are described in the gospel accounts. So there's a lot of his time that is unaccounted for and not well described. And it could be recycling messages. It could be just not top of mind. Holy Spirit didn't inspire writers to put this or that or the other thing in. Like John actually alludes to that at the end of his book. He talks about all the things that else Jesus did. It would take more books than could fit in the earth. So who knows what else happened? Maybe when we get to heaven, we can watch the deleted scenes of Jesus' ministry.
Ooh, yeah. The Gospel, the extended edition.
Yes. All right, in Matthew chapter 8, we have an account of a centurion coming. His servant is sick and very near death, and Jesus agrees to heal him. The centurion is like, no, you don't even need to come to my house, because if you want him healed, you can heal him right now, because I too am a man under authority. I say do this, and then somebody will go and do it, and if I say that, they'll do that. You just say the word, he'll be healed. And Jesus is amazed at the guy's faith and heals the servant from a distance. No touch is necessary, even though that's common. Luke chapter 7, we have Jesus raising somebody back to life for the first time. He's in the village of Nain, which I believe is on your map. A little village known only for this one miracle in the Gospels. This was a widow's only son. As Jesus and his disciples were entering the village of Nain, they were carrying out a dead body to be buried. and everybody's just grieving because a widow is in tough straits to start with, because her source of income is usually going to be her husband, and if her husband dies before she does, hopefully she has a son who can generate an income to support her. And with her only son dying, now she has no one who is directly responsible to take care of her, and she's going to live in poverty for the rest of her life. So Jesus raises him back to life.
Oh, so this is probably like a full-grown dude.
This is probably a full-grown dude, yes. Very much likely a grown man in his 20s, 30s, or 40s, who could have even been 50s for all we know. This guy's up there. But anyway, one thing I want to point out here is that when Jesus raised people back from the dead, it's a little bit different than a resurrection. Because you get raised from the dead back into your current body is different than being resurrected into a new glorified body. So, Will.
Well, does that mean when he does this miracles, their salvation isn't guaranteed? Like they might not be Jews or Christians.
Oh, right, yeah, you can be on the receiving end of a miracle, and it doesn't imply anything about your own righteousness or your own salvation or anything. You're just on the receiving end of a miracle.
So he's kind of using this to like show that he's God, in a sense.
Yeah, and he's being merciful, and
Right,
it's just
yeah.
clearly a very strong demonstration of power. Elisha raised somebody from the dead in the Old Testament, and Jesus is showing he's on par with that and doing a miracle of that caliber.
Yeah.
It was the widow who had cared for Elijah, right?
Her son, yep, who was a younger son, but yep. Anyhow, so this isn't something that hadn't happened in the Old Testament. Elisha had raised a few people from the dead. I wanted to point out though that when Jesus got raised from the dead, he was resurrected into a glorified body, new body, a little different than our current body. The interesting thing about all the people that got raised from the dead by Jesus is they all died again. Whereas when Jesus was resurrected, he's never going to die again. And when we are resurrected, we're never going to die again. So there's a distinction to be made there. I had not even thought about until I was with the Russians in Siberia, and they were pointing this out to me. So. About this time, John the Baptist, who's been hanging out in prison for a solid year and a half or two, is starting to hear of all the reports of what Jesus is doing, and he is wondering why he's still in prison. And so he sends some messengers to Jesus. A few of his disciples were still faithful and loyal to him, and asks the question, are you the one who is to come, or should we wait for someone else? Because John the Baptist was convinced Jesus was the Messiah, but Jesus was not doing what John thought he was going to do as the Messiah. And getting left in prison is discouraging for a couple years' time, I imagine.
Why is he in there?
Because he criticized Herod for taking his brother's wife as his own wife.
Oh, I would too.
Yeah. And you'd be in prison too, back in those days.
He wouldn't get away with it without me taking
Yep.
his pride.
Why do like rulers with authority always have such weird relationships?
Well,
People
really,
have always had weird relationships, like people without authority oftentimes have crazy weird relationships too. It's
Like
just
the
they're not
Oscars.
as famous. You hear about the
Yeah.
famous ones.
Okay, I'm sorry.
and then we never talk about the king who has a single wife and they have 8 beautiful kids, and we never hear about that. We only
Right.
hear about the King Henry VIII who had 5 wives, or
Six.
6 wives.
Six wives.
Yeah.
They made a
Right.
whole musical about it.
Divorce.
Yeah.
It's a 5 years ago.
I mean, like Queen
Musical
Elizabeth
song.
II, she had one husband through her entire reign and marriage. It was very simple, no scandals that I'm aware of or heard of. Queen Elizabeth II.
Yeah.
That's because she was loyal.
That's the one that
The one that just died, yep.
Yeah.
So,
Not the first.
Mhm.
I was running.
now about this time, other people are starting to question Jesus' behavior as well, and that actually includes his family. And in Mark chapter 3, it says that Jesus' mother and his brothers came to get him because they thought he was out of his mind. First, they clearly thought Jesus was doing cool things and they were expecting this is going to go really well, and then Jesus keeps burning the Pharisees and doing things that are not in line with their expectations. And they're like, we need to go collect him. before he does something and hurts himself. And Jesus declines to go with them. Will.
So did Mary just completely forget about the angel situation?
You know, you can remember that story, but when you're expecting one thing and everything's going very differently, it's really hard to make sense and heads and tails of all of it.
Right.
And so,
So could this be used to argue that Mary wasn't sinless? Because she was like really doubting Jesus
she
here.
clearly doubted Jesus, yes.
So then, yeah.
Anyhow, other thing that starts in Jesus' second year, not only is he raising people from the dead and he has his 12 apostles set aside, but he also starts teaching in parables. And the first parable that he recorded is the parable of the rich fool in Luke chapter 12. Luke is not chronological in sequence and scope. But Jesus tells this parable as a response to a guy who's requesting Jesus to resolve his inheritance dispute. And this is a very significant shift in his teaching style. Compared to the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain, all of a sudden Jesus starts talking in riddles that are not easy to discern. He's using earthly stories to start illustrating heavenly ideas. And so his parables are something to look at through a new lens and a new light, because Jesus is using an analogy that everybody can understand here on earth. People know fishing, people know nets, people know farming, sowing seeds, and Jesus is now using all that to illustrate heavenly truths that are otherwise a little more challenging to fully get. And Matthew 13 actually records his disciples coming to him and saying, "Why is it you teach everybody in parables?" And part of Jesus' answer, he says, "To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given." It's an interesting thing. He actually did not intend everybody to understand what he was saying. And if you read the disciples' account, you clearly understand that they don't actually understand what he's saying either. That's one of the fun things that you see in The Chosen. You have now and again, Peter's like, "Are we supposed to understand what you're saying, or are we going to figure this out later?" Because they oftentimes did not have a clue what he was actually talking about. And they very much admit it in the passages in the Gospels.
Did Jesus just kind of give up on telling them exactly how it was after the Pharisees? He had like so many issues with burning the Pharisees and like resulting controversies. He was like, you know what, we're just gonna pivot, switch the style. They won't get it now, but it'll work.
You read through the Gospel accounts and Jesus explaining it, and then you tell me if that fits your description. That could be.
Isaiah did prophesy that he was.
Yeah, Isaiah did prophesy it. Yep, it was fulfilling that. Alright, so a lot of parables get told in Jesus' second year. You don't need to write this whole list down if you don't want to. There's the parable of the sower, the parable of the growing seed, which I'll point out is only in the book of Mark. 7% of the book of Mark is unique to itself, and the other 93% you'll find in other Gospels. The parable of the growing seed is one of those unique verses. There's only 2 or 3 of them. Parable of the weeds, parable of the mustard seed, you can see is on a farming theme. He knew his crowd, they were farmers. Parable of the yeast, it's going to be all the wives making bread every single day. Hidden treasure, the pearl, and the net. And these are recorded in multiple of the synoptic gospels, found in Matthew, Mark, Luke. So after a really long day of teaching, Jesus crosses the Sea of Galilee. And while they're going across the Sea of Galilee, Jesus is asleep, taking a nap. A boat or a storm comes up, and the boat's starting to fill up with water. Somehow Jesus is still asleep, and the disciples wake him up. Jesus commands the wind and the waves to calm down, and the whole lake goes still, and the wind dies down. And the apostles, several of which were fishermen, were terrified at his power, because he just demonstrated not only could he heal people, but he can also command the creation, and it obeys him. He gets across the Sea of Galilee, and he's in the region of the Decapolis near Gerasenes, And this is where he confronts the guy full of demons, the legion. And when he drives the demons out of this man, they go into the herd of swine, and 2,000 of them about run down the hillside into the Sea of Galilee and drown.
So much good food.
Yep. And Scout's like, good riddance. They didn't need to eat that anyway. He is not over there very long. They get back in the boat, and then they head to Capernaum, which is on the north side of the Sea of Galilee. So they just did a zigzag, and all this happens in a single day.
How many miles is that?
Yeah, 6 or 7 miles, I think. I'm not sure. You could use Google Earth and measure the width and the length of the Sea of Galilee. It's smaller than Mille Lacs. I know that much.
They were rowing by hand, though.
Yep. They could also use a sail and wind if they
yeah.
wanted to.
Yeah.
So,
that's
in Capernaum, Jesus performs 2 miracles in short order. Jairus is a guy there who's in charge of the synagogue. Jesus is pretty famous by this point in Capernaum. He asks Jesus to heal his daughter, so Jesus goes with him. Along the way, a very sick woman who's been subject to bleeding her whole life touches Jesus' garment and gets healed supernaturally. And Jesus perceives that power has gone out from him to heal somebody and makes a very big deal about this woman's faith. Meanwhile, Jairus gets word that his daughter is now dead. She's not just sick. And Jesus tells him, just have faith. And everybody says, no, she's dead. Why are you going into her? And Jesus tells them, no, she's not dead. She's just sleeping. Which in Greek is a really interesting euphemism, because if you die in Greek, you're just asleep. And if you're asleep in Greek, you're also asleep. And so Jesus is telling them she's not sleeping, she's just sleeping. So that's a fun one in the language there. Of course, he wasn't speaking in Greek, he was speaking in Aramaic. So that's an interesting concept. But he raises Jairus' daughter back to life. Only Peter, James, and John and the parents of the girl are there to actually witness it. Everybody else has plausible deniability, and the cover story is she was actually only sleeping, she was not actually dead. Because Jesus is not trying to attract attention to himself. I believe the disciples that saw it were told not to say anything about it until after he was raised from the dead, which probably raised more questions in their head than gave them answers, but they listened and obeyed. So now he goes on a healing tear. Got a couple blind men who request to be healed. Jesus heals them by touching their eyes, tells them not to speak about it, but of course they spread the word. Then there's a mute man, and this guy can't talk because he's got a demon in him, and so Jesus drives out the demon and he can talk. And I don't know if you tell a mute man not talk about how you're healed, because he's talking again. So the Pharisees are trying to explain this away, and they say, well, Jesus is driving out demons by the power of Satan himself. It's not actually God doing this. Demon deliverance is not a thing from the Old Testament, and so this one's a real novel miracle going on. Driving demons out of people is not something others could do. That's recorded. So the Pharisees are trying to make heads and tails of it, and their explanation is that it's actually by Satan's power, and this is where Jesus talks about a house being divided against itself, because pointing out the logical inconsistency of it. Then we have a very significant development in Jesus' training of the 12. We're about most of the way through the second year of ministry. So the 12 have been hanging out with him for 2 to 2.5 years. They have heard him, they have seen him, they have watched him, they've asked him lots of questions, they know what he's doing, and all of a sudden Jesus gives them authority to drive out demons and heal the sick, and he sends them out 2 by 2 in pairs to go minister. and Jesus himself goes out too, by himself or with a few of the others perhaps. So there's 6 pairs in Jesus going around Galilee ministry. Now what's the advantage of 6 pairs in Jesus' ministry? He ministered in 7 places simultaneously. Jesus was confined by his body. He could not be everywhere all at once like the Holy Spirit is today. He could be in one place at one time. And so he was training up a whole bunch of disciples so that they could break the constraint of humanity only being in one place at one time. If 12 of them all have heard and seen and know the same stuff, they can go other places too. Now it's just about this time that we get to the 3rd Passover in John chapter 6. This is when John the Baptist is beheaded, and it was right after the disciples come back from their ministry trip in pairs. Jesus learns of John the Baptist getting killed, and he wants to withdraw to a solitary place so his disciples can rest from their travels, and so he can grieve the death of John the Baptist. And crowds all find Jesus. And so Jesus lets his disciples rest, and he stands up and he ministers. And this is where you've got 5,000 men and an unknown number of women and children along with them, in the middle of nowhere in Galilee, or across the sea, actually, possibly in the Decapolis. It could have been over there. And the feeding of the 5,000 takes place after Jesus teaches the disciples, or teaches this crowd. He takes a couple loaves and 5 fish and feeds 5,000 men plus women and children, and they have more leftovers than they even started with. And this is the one miracle besides the resurrection of Jesus that is recorded in all 4 of the Gospels. So this is a nice story that can be used to synchronize the Gospel accounts very well, and this happens just before the Passover that year. So after the 5,000 are fed, Jesus dismisses the crowd. The disciples get in a boat. Jesus sends them on ahead of him. Not sure what they were thinking. But they go starting across the lake. And then Jesus just walks out onto the lake after having spent most of the night in prayer. Their nights were divided up into 4 watches, roughly 3 hours each. First watch would be from 6 to 9. The second watch would be from 9 to midnight. The third watch would be from midnight to 3. And then the 4th watch of the night would be the 3 hours right before sunrise, roughly 3 to 6. And the disciples are having a hard time rowing across the lake because the wind is against them. And Jesus walks out and meets them, and they think they're seeing a ghost. Peter's not sure, so he's like, if you actually are Jesus, call me out to walk on the water to you. I don't know why that worked in his head, but it was the middle of the night, and he was maybe perhaps a bit sleep deprived. Because if I saw what I thought was a ghost walking across a lake, I wouldn't say, if you're actually who you say you are, ask me to walk out to you. But Peter walks out on the Sea of Galilee to Jesus, sinks, and then gets pulled back up. And then the next morning, the crowd figured out where Jesus was headed, and they find him. And at this point, they thought this was pretty awesome, that he just fed them food that they didn't have to pay for, didn't have to grow, and they were ready to make him king. And Jesus was not here to become king. And so he gives them a very challenging teaching, which is known as the bread of life teaching. And Jesus says to them, I am the bread of life. If you do not eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no share in me. And everybody's like, now you're insane and crazy, because none of us can eat your flesh or drink your blood. That is totally against the law of Moses. And most of the crowd and most of his disciples desert him because this teaching is too hard for them to accept. What they don't know is that what Jesus is telling them is a spiritual metaphor, so to speak, and this is the precursor passage to what we celebrate in communion now, where we have bread, which is representative of his body, and we have wine or grape juice, which is representative of his blood. It is not the real thing, it is just a memorial of his death on the cross, where his body was broken and his blood was shed. But Jesus was actually intentionally trying to burn most of these people because he had a unique scheme of ministry training for his 3rd year. And we will see that next week. I believe that is our last slide. Summary slides, okay. So, discipleship in the 2nd year. He sets apart his apostles. They continue watching and listening, but then they are given authority, and he sends them out to preach and to heal, drive out demons, and it works. They drive out demons and they're healing people, and they're quite amazed. And then the highlight reel from his 2nd year, as far as signs and wonders go. You don't need to write all these down by any means, but just reviewing. He heals a paralytic, heals a guy with a withered hand, heals a centurion's servant from a distance, raises a widow's son back to life, calms a storm, walks on the water, drives out the legion, feeds 5,000, and he also raises a dead man. Does anybody have any questions off of Jesus' 2nd year of ministry? Are we remembering any of these passages as we've read through a couple of the Gospels in entirety?